travel opportunity, financial support. Also, thank you to Dave for bringing Aldo, and so we can go ahead and get started with that.
Great, thank you, Megan. Yeah, it's really good to be here. Kind of our connection to the College of Law kind of began with Shannon around the campfire, and we're talking about what one another does, and she's in environmental law, and I work with the UI Wild Department, the College of Education. WILD stands for Wildlife Instruction and Leadership Development. And we said we need to work together somewhere down the line, and that somewhere down the line became the class that is offered during the summer during the intersession, where we have a 1 week intensive where there's mornings spent in the field doing wildlife stuff, and in the afternoon talking about the laws related to that. So it's been really fun to be connected to Healy and a number of familiar faces in here. So this issue between barred owls and spotted owls, is something that there's a lot of passion on both sides, and it's just one of those issues that's really difficult. And I'm glad that you're going to hear both sides of it. We definitely wanted to tilt the scales by bringing in one of the players so that you have this emotional connection. Just kidding. But we really wanted for you to have an opportunity to see what are we even talking about. So barred owls are found now pretty much throughout this area. They weren't in the habitats that spotted owls have lived in for a long time, but because of human expansion, planting of kind of forests in the plains, and allowing barred owls to move, because barred owls love woodlands, they've now found their way into the same habitats that spotted owls are in, and are more aggressive. And they tend to have smaller home ranges than spotted owls. They're able to prey upon the greater diversity of food. That's why they have smaller home ranges. So now you have spotted owls maybe trying to compete with 4 pairs of barred owls in the same area, and it's just not working. So spotted owls populations are declining, and I'm sure that our guests are going to be sharing a little bit more about the situation. But the owl that I have here is a barred owl. He was hatched this spring. He fell out of the nest prematurely, fractured kind of the finger. So if you think about a bird and it has a bend in the wing, it's not an elbow, it's actually the wrist. And so the bones in his hand, per se, were fractured in the wing, but they couldn't be fixed. And so it's a permanently non-releasable bird. So we got this bird at a really good age if you're going to use one for educational programming like we do at the Iowa Raptor Project, because with owls, only owls, you want to imprint them because it helps. They're just a lot easier to work with for education. For a hawk, you don't really want to imprint them. They can actually be more dangerous. So all those young birds still, he's done very few programs. He's going to be super curious and cute. And let's see how he does here. So we'll just kind of try to keep our sounds down as best we can, because owls are hypersensitive to noise. And let's see how it goes. I'll keep him out as long as he seems comfortable. Of course, the guests need to share their discussion. Spotlight here. All right, just need to get my clip in here. Be good to go. Barred owls are right here in the neighborhood. So I used to have a house on Melrose Court, and I actually was feed a barred owl on my deck. I'd put dead mice out there and come in, we'd have parties like, okay, let's turn off the lights and watch the barred owl show. They're all over the place. They're able to adapt to human environments. They are super loud. Like if you've ever been camping in Iowa, you've probably heard of barred owl. Well, a lot of people describe it as the 8-hooter, who cooks for you, who cooks for you all. And that's a really standard call, super loud call. And then we were talking about this, Shannon and I, where sometimes you'll have a family of them and then they'll kind of sound like a barrel of monkeys. They get this wah, 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 wah. And they're really an amazing bird. Now, barred owls have more streaked chests, more barring, and then the spotted owls are going to be more spotted on the belly up front. This guy's checking out our screen here. We're our guests here. I'm going to back up. Like I said, I'm super curious. So let's try to distract him by kind of getting just the wall behind him here. They got those big brown eyes, and they have really good night vision. Owls have eyeballs per se. They're kind of like eye cylinders, and so that's why, because they can't look side to side, they'll turn their whole heads around, and kind of like how he's looking up there and seeing what's going on. Their heads can swivel a total of 540 degrees. So if it's looking straight ahead at you, it can look to the right, it can look behind, and it can look over the left shoulder, and spin it around and go the other way. So 540 degrees is kind of the range. And that's just crazy anatomical adaptation in their neck that allows them to do that. Like I mentioned, they're really good at catching a variety of prey. They do seem to like a lot of wetlands. A lot of times you'll hear where they will share the same habitat as red-shouldered hawks, which ironically is red-shouldered hawks are endangered in Iowa, but barred owls have proliferated because they've been able to expand beyond kind of those floodplains. So as any raptor, it's going to catch its prey with its feet. It comes from a Latin word which means to seize. And so they will locate their prey by hearing, but also then with their eyesight. The back of their retinas are loaded with rods rather than cones. Cones are the color receptors, rods are the light receptors. They have great nocturnal vision, great hearing, and locate and catch their prey now. I was sharing with someone, there was a young barred owl had fallen out of the nest in Coralville, COVID year, 2020. And we went to find this bird, and all around this young owl were these dead warblers. So warblers are little neotropical migrant songbirds, and I had never even imagined that a barred owl could catch these songbirds. And what was happening is these songbirds in the spring are just so triggered to sing that they're not paying attention necessarily to what's around them, and so it was easy pickings for this barred owl to catch these and then play out. So just really a great hunter, a great predator. Again, super common even right here in this neighborhood. So I don't know how much longer you want me to go, or you want to hear from our guests. But time for questions, or you want to take a couple questions here? Maybe from those who weren't out here in the foyer earlier asking questions. Yes.
Will he be fully grown?
Yeah, he's fully grown. So their incubation is 28 days, like so 4 weeks. And then they usually fledge in about, I'm going to say 5 weeks, around 35 days. And when the bird comes out of the nest, they are fully grown. So so he's relatively small. So there's what we call sexual dimorphism. Males are smaller than females in birds of prey. And so this is a male and he's a bit smaller. Yeah.
I thought you were shooting his last
Great. Let's give a quiet round of applause.
Sure.
Thank you so much for bringing Aldo over here.
Yeah.
And where can they go see Aldo if they want to?
Yes, so come to the Iowa Raptor Project at the McBride Nature Recreation Area. On the front table, if you didn't see them, we have stickers, okay? Of barred owls. And then there's also some bookmarks that tell us about the UI Wild program. You can find everything you need there. So yeah, good to have y'all. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started with our panel. To introduce our panel is Jessica Blum, who's an Iowa Law alum. She's a shareholder at Green Fire Law in San Francisco. Is it Oakland? Big. Okay, and then we have
Berkeley.
Steve Hernick, who's the managing attorney of the wildlife program at Friends of Animals, Tom Wheeler, who's the executive director and staff attorney at Environmental Protection Information Center, and Abram Hiller, who's an associate professor in the Department of Philosophy at Portland State University. So I think we'll go ahead and turn it over. Sorry that we can't flip the camera so that you can see the room. I'm not sure how to do that, but it's a pretty full house here, and we're all really excited to hear your panel. So, go ahead.
Okay, thanks so much for, really excited to be talking to everyone today. And this is a bit of a unique situation in our field, in that, we have a panel here of people who are on different sides of an issue, even though we're generally on the same side on most issues. And, we're actually adversaries in litigation right now. I'm the lead attorney for Friends of Animals on litigation challenging the barred owl management plan. Jessica's also involved in that, and Tom, his group Epic has intervened in our cases challenging the plan. So let me try to share my screen. Okay, this should be working. It looks like I can see in that other view that you can see the screen. So here's a picture of a barred owl and a spotted owl, just so you can get an idea of the owls who are the target of this plan, and picture of an owl who is the goal of this plan to try and help. I'm going to try to give you a brief overview of exactly what is involved here. I'm sure a lot of you have a good level of familiarity with this, but others may not. I'm just going to assume that you don't have any familiarity, so to get everyone up to speed so that the other panelists can give you their perspective. Jessica will be talking about our litigation, the challenge against the plan. Tom will be talking about why he supports barred owl removal to help spotted owls, and Avram will be talking about some different philosophical ways of thinking about the issues presented by this plan. So what are we dealing with here? Well, last year, federal agency, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, authorized a decision to approve the killing of up to 450,000 barred owls in the next 30 years in Northern California, Oregon, and Washington. This is a really unique plan because barred owls are federally protected animals. They are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So it is unprecedented in federal law to take this many federally protected animals. It's also pretty unprecedented under the Endangered Species Act to try to protect a species, in this case, spotted owls. Northern spotted owls are listed as threatened. California spotted owls are proposed to be listed as threatened under the ESA, but it's unprecedented under the ESA to kind of target another species to help a listed species under the ESA. So in authorizing this decision, Fish and Wildlife Service issued an EIS under the National Environmental Policy Act, and also issued a Migratory Bird Treaty Act permit. That's kind of actually a really interesting issue. They issued a special purpose permit. They kind of purported to create this new type of permit for this type of action, but didn't go through any rulemaking procedure for that. Just kind of demonstrating the unique novel nature of this plan. So just a bit of background on spotted owls. I'm sure Tom will talk about them more. the northern spotted owl is a pretty iconic species in the Pacific Northwest, been listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act since 1990. When it was listed in 1990, primary threats found by Fish and Wildlife Service were habitat loss and the inadequacy of existing protections. Spotted owls are certainly a phenomenal animal. No one here wants to see spotted owls go extinct. We just differ a bit in what we think should be done to protect them. Certainly, all of us agree that more should be done to protect their habitat in the Pacific Northwest. I have some stats here, but over the years, Fish and Wildlife Service has reduced the number of acres of critical habitat that are protected under the ESA for the northern spotted owl. The agency has also found that the northern spotted owl warrants listing as an endangered species, but hasn't actually listed it as an endangered species because it has also found that listing is precluded by other higher priorities. At the same time, California spotted owls, the agency has proposed to list them as threatened, hasn't actually finalized that listing yet. So, as of this date, California spotted owls do not have, ESA protections. I think it's also fair to say that all of us on the panel here agree that federal agencies and particularly Fish and Wildlife Service have not done enough to protect spotted owls over the past decades, and the terrible plight that spotted owls find themselves in right now, is in no small part to the lack of adequate protections and conservation measures by Fish and Wildlife Service. So, why is the agency taking this approach to kill, potentially hundreds of thousands of federally protected owls to help the spotted owls? As it was mentioned earlier, most believe that barred owls are not native to the Pacific Northwest. It's not exactly clear how and why they came to the Pacific Northwest from the eastern United States and eastern North America. The two kind of most likely explanations, and the agency has deemed these probable explanations, kind of acknowledging the lack of certainty in them. But those are what was mentioned earlier, kind of the planting of trees in the Great Plains of the United States and southern Canada by white settlers over the past couple hundred years, where previously the Great Plains were a vast expanse devoid largely of trees that kind of prevented barred owls from being able to travel west. There's also evidence that that climate change led to barred owls being able to move west through southern Canada, where previously winters were too harsh in southern Canada for barred owls. But over the years, as winters became more mild, they were able to live and to pass through parts of southern Canada and make their way west, first to British Columbia, and then kind of southward to Washington, Oregon, and now into Northern California. Barred owls do not prey on spotted owls, but they do compete with spotted owls. They tend to inhabit the same areas. Barred owls are more generalist owls in terms of the areas they inhabit and also the prey. Spotted owls are much more particular, requiring old growth forests that are unique to the Pacific Northwest and disappearing over time. Interestingly, the these different species of owls do occasionally mate, and when they mate, they produce what the agency calls hybrid owls. Now, under the plan, these hybrid owls will also be shot and killed. The agency is taking the view that even hybrid owls are a threat to barred owls and are worth removing. Just a bit of background. I won't go through this too much, but just give you some information here. Friends of Animals was involved in some litigation years ago over an initial experiment that Fish and Wildlife Service embarked on to kind of do a trial run of barred owl removal in 5 different areas in the Pacific Northwest, to see what the results would be on whether this would help spotted owls. There, the agency issued an NBTA scientific collecting permit. That's different than the permit that is at issue here. The agency wasn't allowed to issue that type of permit here because this is no longer a scientific experiment. It's a management plan. We did pursue this case up to the Ninth Circuit. We did not prevail in our challenge to that. During the experiment, about 2,500 barred owls were killed. And one of the disagreements that we have here that say Tom and I would disagree on is how effective the experiment was. I think it's pretty clear that it had a weak effect on spotted owl recruitment, that spotted owl populations did not meaningfully increase in any of the study areas, and in the areas where barred owls were killed, new barred owls moved in after others were killed. So what does this plan involve? Agencies will be having to work with a number of different federal agencies and training people to come into areas to shoot barred owls. They'll mainly be doing this at night. They'll be luring barred owls with calls via megaphones, and the plan also authorizes the use of traps and snares and bait, and this is kind of interesting because it limited what the agency could do with respect to a Migratory Bird Treaty Act permit. It had to pursue a different kind of NBTA permit because of the use of calls and luring barred owls this way. When barred owls are shot, they generally will, the carcasses will not be removed from the area. They'll simply be left where they're shot and covered up by vegetation. This is, a map of the areas where killing of barred owls will be authorized. The plan really kind of envisions a wide swath of areas where removal will take place, and prioritizes flexibility of agencies being able to adapt to conditions rather than targeting specific areas. Notably, one of our claims in the case challenges the removal of barred owls in wilderness areas, but the plan includes federal lands, state lands, private lands, tribal lands, national parks, wilderness areas, a very wide swath. I'll conclude here by just talking about a few of the implications of this. We're really concerned about the plan's labeling of barred owls as an invasive species, and of saying that any species that adapts its habitat in any way, and if humans can somehow be termed the root cause of that, if you're saying that is an invasive species, there's really no limit to what an invasive species would be given the wide impact that humans have, and it does have really grave implications for species that have to adapt in response to climate change. And this is hardly a unique situation. It won't be a unique situation in the future. And I think it's also very fair to expect industries to point to this as the way to move forward to protect endangered species, rather than to cut back on human activity and logging and other other big threats to animals. So I will stop it there and hand it off to Jessica to talk about the litigation.
All right, thank you, Stephen. And it's nice to be here back at my alma mater, speaking to everybody. I'm a 2007 proud graduate of the College of Law, Go Hawks, and am pleased to be with you today. As Megan indicated, my name is Jessica, and I'm an attorney at Greenfire Law, which is in Berkeley, California, right next door to San Francisco and Oakland. So she was so close. But it's a small town, but quite famous town right nearby those bigger cities. Well, I want to just sort of give a little bit of reverence for the northern spotted owl before I go into the litigation, because as Stephen mentioned, it is indisputably an iconic species. For hundreds of years, that little owl with white spots has made its home in the lush old growth forests of the Pacific Northwest. And in the 1980s, it became clear that timber companies really wanted to clear cut the forests of the Pacific Northwest until the old growth was gone. They valued the timber that was available there. They wanted it to fuel the housing boom that was happening in the 80s, the construction boom, and that was going to be their goal. Grassroots environmentalists showed up in the woods to physically protect these trees from chainsaws. Forest defenders blocked logging roads, chained themselves to logging equipment, and in general did whatever they could to slow the pace of destruction. Meanwhile, more established environmental groups filed lawsuits in federal court to halt the timber sales. And also at the same time, scientists were finding that old growth forests were not the biological deserts that the timber companies argued, but rather complex ecosystems well worth preserving. That emerging research also revealed a vital connection between old growth forest stands and the well-being of the northern spotted owl. It's now been identified as an indicator species for old growth ecosystems. Protect these stands, the thinking went, and you'd protect not only the bird, but the many creatures that depend on the trees. The northern spotted owl became the symbol of the political and legal contest over the fate of the Pacific Northwest. And for forest activists, the bird was a kind of mascot. For loggers, it became a target of vitriol. Stephen mentioned in 1986, a group of worried environmentalists petitioned the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to list the northern spotted owl as endangered, a move that would have barred the timber industry from clearing the lands. And in June of 1990, 4 years later, after heated negotiation and litigation, the northern spotted owl was declared a threatened species. Now, 40 years on, here we are, and the service has identified a new threat to the survival of the northern spotted owl, the barred owl, native to eastern United States, with evidence suggesting that a closely related subspecies has always thrived in the Pacific Northwest, threatens the survival of the northern spotted owl. Stephen did a marvelous job explaining the government's response to that threat, and now I'm going to talk about two lawsuits that challenge the service's barred owl management strategy. The first is brought by Animal Wellness Action and the Center for Humane Economy, challenge was brought in the U.S. District Court in Washington on Halloween last year, 2023 now, I think. Friends of Animals filed the second suit in the U.S. District Court in Oregon a few weeks later. An update, the Washington suit has just been transferred hot off the presses today to the district in Oregon. As of today, the cases are ongoing. I represent Animal Wellness Action and the Center for Humane Economy alongside Claire Davis of Animal and Earth Advocates. But all the animal rights groups in the two suits challenge the service's approval of the barred owl management strategy and the strategy's final environmental impact statement, and then the issuance of that Migratory Bird Treaty Act Special Purpose Permit, which Stephen referenced. All three together, those documents and authorities implement the strategies planned to kill 450,000 barred owls over the next 30 years. Plaintiffs argue that the strategy is a federal effort to determine the evolutionary paths of species to a degree never seen before in American wildlife management. Avian population management for the protection of threatened species is not new, and it can be an essential tool to battle and preserve at-risk birds and ecosystems that rely on those ecological habitats. But here it appears to be, in our estimation, an attempt to justify a new and radical approach to species management. In service of that new and radical approach, the government has affixed this invasive label on a species that is endemic to North America, simply because it migrated to the West Coast states and came into competition with the northern spotted owl. The reasons for the barred owl's centuries-long migration path might be complex, but they're certainly under debate. And even the service offers multiple competing theories when challenged. Ultimately, though, the service concluded that since the barred owl's migration can be linked to climate change, apparently the barred owl's gradual move westward cannot be viewed as natural. So they want to cause climate change and take advantage of it when they can declare something as not natural. So let's talk about the litigation itself. The plaintiffs argue that in the development of the barred owl management strategy, the service failed, this is the Fish and Wildlife Service, to abide by federal law in several different ways. First, under the National Environmental Policy Act. I don't know if many of you have taken environmental law, so I'm going to go through like a little bit of a primer on what these laws kind of do. So the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, is the basic charter for protection of the environment in the United States. Congress passed NEPA, as we call it, with two fundamental purposes. One, to guarantee that a federal agency takes what's called a hard look at the consequences before taking any action that might have a significant effect on the human environment. By ensuring that the agency, in reaching its decision, will have available and will carefully consider detailed information concerning significant impacts. Now, this is a written document, but it is supported with scientific evidence. The second fundamental purpose of NEPA is to ensure that the relevant information that will be made available to a larger audience, that's us, the public, who may then play a role in both the decision-making process of the federal government and the implementation of that decision through public comment opportunities and lawsuits like the one that you're seeing here. The document that contains all of NEPA's requirements, including this analysis and evidence and scientific basis and alternatives for the proposed federal action, is called an environmental impact statement. Now, not every action requires an environmental impact statement, but one that purports to authorize the killing of 450,000 owls certainly does. In the EIS, so now there's another acronym. The federal agency must consider a range of reasonable alternative actions and an assessment of direct, indirect, and cumulative environmental effects of the proposed alternatives. Cumulative effects are the impact on the environment, which result from the incremental impact of the action when added to other past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions, regardless of whether the federal or non-federal agency or some private person might undertake those actions. So in order to take that hard look that the statute requires, the federal agencies must consider those past, present, and reasonably future foreseeable impacts. Now, there's a ton of litigation around NEPA right now, and the United States Supreme Court is sort of changing this law as we speak, literally in real time. But those bedrock principles remain in place. So plaintiffs first argue that the Fish and Wildlife Service failed to consider a reasonable range of alternatives. The examination of alternatives is the heart of an environmental impact statement. And any EIS requiring consideration of range of alternatives must also include the direct, indirect, and cumulative environmental effects of those proposed alternatives. Plaintiffs argue that the service failed to adequately consider the following alternatives. One, Well, I guess not necessarily alternatives, but they violated this provision in the following ways. One, by failing to analyze alternatives that non-lethal methods of controlling barred owl populations might work. By failing to analyze alternatives that would reduce the number of barred owls killed or prohibit the killing of hybrid owls, even though such alternatives may have limited adverse impacts on spotted owls. We argue that the service narrowly defined the purpose and need of the project to exclude the analysis of alternatives that might have been more effective in supporting spotted owl populations, such as alternatives that focused on the creation and maintenance of spotted owl habitat, either as an alternative to or in conjunction with the removals. We also allege that they failed to analyze the impacts to public safety and critically, as our professor will describe later, they failed to consider the ethical implications of their actions. We also alleged that the government failed to analyze the foreseeable impacts of their decision to remove 450,000 barred owls from the West Coast. When an agency proposes a project to be implemented without further site-specific NEPA review, so in project by project NEPA review, it must disclose the details of that action at a site-specific level and perform a detailed environmental analysis of those reasonably foreseeable impacts. We argue that the service failed to identify the timing, location, intensity, or other specifics of barred owl removal activities, leaving those details to be identified by future unknown entities without additional environmental review. We understand right now that the government is taking applications from various local government entities and private actors, including logging companies, to carry out this removal plan because it's not going to be the United States Fish and Wildlife Service itself that is shooting the animals. We also argue that the government or the United States Fish and Wildlife Service violated NEPA by failing to analyze the cumulative impacts to non-target species and to northern spotted owls caught in the crossfire. We argue this service failed to take a hard look at the impacts of its decision, including the likelihood that spotted owls might be mistakenly killed or otherwise adversely impacted by removal activities, the likelihood that marbled murrelets, another iconic endangered species in the Pacific Northwest, might be adversely impacted by removal activities, the adverse impact of the management strategy on other threatened and endangered species that might be on the ground, mammals or lizards or, other types of animals, the cascading impacts. The service failed to consider the foreseeable and cumulative impacts that that climate change will affect the resiliency of the ecosystem and the effectiveness of the proposed action and alternatives in light of that fact. And then also the cumulative impacts of other state, federal, and private actions, including logging activities, that should really be considered in evaluating the resiliency of an ecosystem to adopt both of these animals together. NEPA also requires that a government agency define the purpose and need to shape the purpose and need of the environmental impact statement. So the purpose and need of the project here to remove 450,000 owls. It must have been defined to shape the range of alternatives for consideration. So if the purpose and need statement is too narrow, then you can exclude yourself from considering a range of alternatives. If the purpose and need statement is, as we also argue, based on a false premise that barred owls are an invasive species, then plaintiffs argue it can be incorrect and lead to all kinds of decision making based on that false premise that would violate underlying laws that NEPA requires that the agency consider. So we argue that the purpose and need statement was insufficiently narrow and made this false assumption that barred owls are invasive in order to reach the conclusion it reached that they need to be removed. And we argue that's in violation of NEPA. Under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, so separate and apart from the National Environmental Policy Act, we argue that the Migratory Bird Treaty Act special use permit issued for the removal of 450,000 owls did not contemplate such removal activity and wasn't intended to serve as the vehicle for government to remove that many animals or maybe even any animals. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act, for its part, makes it unlawful to take by any means or in any manner a migratory bird. So the service has to authorize take of those protected birds, including barred owls, with the permit. But in doing that, it must give due regard to the zones of temperature and to the distribution, abundance, economic value, breeding habits, and times and lines of migratory flight of such birds. They cannot issue a permit if the requested action would potentially threaten a wildlife or plant population. And permits require that killings be conducted with a shotgun, prohibiting use of blinds, pits, other means of concealment, decoys, and calling. So when the service adopted the strategy and authorized these removals with this permit, they plainly violated the statute. And as Stephen pointed out, they made up this permit type in order to facilitate their decision making. We argue that the agency, in order to make up a permit type, has to, at a minimum, go through notice and comment rulemaking to give the public an opportunity to participate in the decision to make the new permit. But instead, the service collapsed the two actions together and created the permit without notice and comment in order to facilitate this plan. And then finally, Friends of Animals and their separate action that's likely to be consolidated with the animal wellness action also added a Wilderness Act claim because some of the places where barred owl removals will take place will be in wilderness areas. The Wilderness Act itself requires that each agency administering any area designated as wilderness must be responsible for preserving the wilderness character of the area, administer it such that it is the area for such other purposes for which may have been established to preserve the wilderness character only. So there's no real power to remove animals in this manner from the Wilderness Act. It would appear to be an absolute prohibition. But the national under this barred owl management strategy sort of doesn't even consider those types of impacts. So that is the sum total of the lawsuits, and we'll be happy to take questions at the end, but now we'll turn it over to Tom.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Wheeler. I'm the executive director of EPIC. EPIC is a conservation group based in Northern California, based in the Redwoods, where we have worked since 1977 to defend the mature and old growth forests of our region, which are the forests that the northern spotted owl require to survive. And we still to this day most actively engage in habitat issues. So we have 5 active lawsuits right now to protect northern spotted owl habitat. But also, we recognize that habitat alone is not going to be sufficient to prevent the extinction of the northern spotted owl. We have a choice here. We could choose to do nothing and allow the continued range expansion of the barred owl, which is going to result in the extinction of the northern spotted owl, or we can do something. And so my organization and conservation groups across the Pacific Northwest have decided that we should do something. So I'm going to make the case that we should do something. So first, let's talk about the problem. Fundamentally, the problem is that barred owls are not native to the West Coast. It's clear that habitat modification in the Great Plains from things like tree planting, as well as killing bison and elk, killing beavers, and fire exclusion, both of natural wildfires and indigenous burning practices, has resulted in more forested conditions. And these forested conditions are what allowed the range expansion of the barred owl to the west coast of North America. And we know this because we have seen it kind of in real time. So, we have records of the first time that barred owls were seen in various places. So you can see that the initial records in Manitoba, moving across Alberta, all the way to British Columbia. And then we can see the barred owls after having reached British Columbia, moving down the West Coast. So this is a recent phenomenon. We had our first barred owl here in California in 1976, but it really wasn't until about 10, 15 years ago that barred owl populations here were sufficient to start having a profound impact on northern spotted owls. The second point that is crucial is that barred owls are driving northern spotted owls to extinction. Full stop. Again, my organization has been one that has fought for northern spotted owl habitat for more than 45 years. And we recognize that habitat protection alone is not going to be sufficient. So it was great to meet Aldo earlier. What a fantastic, charismatic bird. And I was so glad to hear some of what I'm going to say now said before, which is barred owls, like northern spotted owls, are territorial. Unlike northern spotted owls, they are more of a habitat generalist. They can exist in a wider range of habitats than the northern spotted owl. And they're also more of a generalist predator, meaning that they eat a much broader array of life than the northern spotted owl, which is more of a rodentivore. They have a larger body than the northern spotted owl. They typically produce more young per year than the northern spotted owl. And this combination of factors means that the barred owl can exist in densities on the landscape that are higher than the northern spotted owl. So I wanted to clarify one thing, which is it's true that barred owls do not prey on northern spotted owls, but they are territorial. And in defending their territory, they will come in and set up a nest site and then exclude other owls from that territory. In doing that, barred owls have been known to directly attack and kill northern spotted owls. So it is not as if this is just mere competition for resources. This is physical exclusion of northern spotted owls from nest sites, preventing them from reproducing. Here's kind of another way that we can see the effect of barred owls. So in British Columbia, northern spotted owls are extinct in the wild. In Washington state, they are nearly extinct. I think 80% is probably an underestimate of total population decline. In places like the Olympic Peninsula, this luscious old growth habitat protected as a natural national park, we have, I think, one pair of breeding northern spotted owls there left. In Oregon, where invasion is more recent than in Washington or British Columbia, they're not doing well. And in California, where the invasion is most recent, they're doing a little bit better, but they're still severely declining. We can also kind of see this relationship through occupancy across the range of the northern spotted owl. So when you have more barred owls, which I believe here are represented in yellow, yeah, there he is, you will have fewer spotted owls, right? It's a pretty clear relationship. This is about as clear as we can get. The northern spotted owl is fantastically well researched as a result of its listing under the Endangered Species Act. It is a consequential species because of its listing under the Endangered Species Act. So we know a lot about the northern spotted owl. Again, habitat's not going to be sufficient. We can't protect our way to save the northern spotted owl. One thing that the northern spotted owl has resulted in is something called the Northwest Forest Plan, which massively reshaped how the federal government manages forest lands within the Pacific Northwest. And one result of the Northwest Forest Plan is proforestation. We are seeing forests age in place, such that we are basically at a zero net loss of northern spotted owl habitat at this time, with projected future increases in northern spotted owl habitat as forests kind of age into becoming better and better habitat. And despite all of this, again, we're continuing to see northern spotted owl declines and steepening declines. This is not what would occur if this was only a habitat issue. So again, the northern spotted owl is fantastically well researched, and so we often use it as some sort of an indicator species. So if the northern spotted owl is not doing well, we have a good idea that perhaps other species that rely on similar habitat to the northern spotted owl are also not doing well. And so right now that like red light is flashing based on how poorly the northern spotted owl is doing. So we know that barred owls are impacting other species like western screech owls. Again, where you have sufficient barred owl invasion, we have a localized extinction of western screech owls. because they are competitive, they will force out other owls from their territory. We also have some sort of idea that because of the diet differences between the two species, that there's likely going to be impacts. So as I said earlier, the northern spotted owl is a rodentivore. So nearly all of its calories come from these three species. So you have red tree voles, flying squirrels, and dusky-footed wood rats. So the barred owl eats those species as well, but it has a much more cosmopolitan, a much more diverse diet. Includes a lot of smaller prey, things like salamanders, reptiles, other birds, amphibians, and insects. Things that are generally not within the biomass that is consumed by a northern spotted owl. And yet still, even because they have a wider diet, the densities in which barred owls can exist on the landscape mean that there's probably more of an impact to the three cornerstone species, the voles, the squirrels, and the wood rats, that the northern spotted owl uses. This is one kind of easy way to see the diet of a barred owl. So this is a barred owl perch, and here are the claws of crayfish stacked on the perch. Again, a species that the northern spotted owl would never use. So this is a new and new impact in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. Because there is this new impact, because our forests of the Pacific Northwest did not co-evolve with barred owls, it is risking a systemic collapse of ecosystems. So, for example, if the barred owl starts to take away things like burrowing mammals, we can see impacts to soil processing. If we have impacts to things like squirrels and chipmunks, we might have a reduction in hardwoods. So we could see knock-on effects. These are going to be difficult for us to ever sort of prove. The research is going to be difficult to accomplish to show these, but this is what scientists think may be a likelihood with further barred owl invasion of the Pacific Northwest. Lastly, spotted owls function as an umbrella for other species. So this spotted owl here is the first spotted owl I ever saw in the wild. I saw her outside of Willow Creek, California. So because the northern spotted owl is protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act, all of the other life that exists with spotted owls in that same habitat is also somewhat protected. So things like the Humboldt martin or southern torrent salamanders, these are also going to be protected. We do not have a replacement for the northern spotted owl in terms of the protection of mature and old growth forests across the range, across the Pacific Northwest. It doesn't exist. So as northern spotted owls decline, we see more loosening of regulations, of prohibitions on logging of these same forests. So we know too that because of these barred owl removal experiments, that barred owl removal is effective. So this is Lowell Diller. Lowell Diller was a wildlife biologist, recently passed with a baby northern spotted owl. Lowell Diller conducted the first removal experiment beginning in 2009 on industrial forest lands here in the Redwoods. So this was a paired experiment with removal areas and control areas. And what we found was that after barred owl removal, northern spotted owls came back pretty well because they're territorial. They will force out northern spotted owls. They will become what we call floaters on the landscape. So these are non-reproducing, but sexually capable of reproducing adult spotted owls. And so when the barred owls leave, the northern spotted owls can come back in and recolonize the historic nest sites that they once utilized. And such and I'll show a couple of slides that just kind of pretty immediately show that removal started to produce profound benefits for the northern spotted owl. Because of that initial success, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service expanded this removal to all 3 states. So we had multiple study areas across all 3 states. Here they are on the right. So treatment areas, the areas that are removed are going to be in orange. The control areas where there is no removal are in blue. The time frame for all of these removals is here on the left. And again, what we saw is that removal was extremely effective in slowing that rate of decline. Basically, that rate of decline flatlined. It was 0.02%. Is that right, Stephen? Decline continued after this. We went from -12, a very severe decline, to almost no decline at all in the removal areas. That's substantial. Again, more evidence of success. So I also want to make the case here that removal is itself humane. So there are strict protocols, including training for personnel, and these have demonstrated effectiveness. So the strategy itself, barred owl removal strategy, is based on the experiment. So we know that these sorts of things work. So in the experiment, we had 97% single shot kills. So again, with the shotgun, as gruesome as it is a relatively quick and painless death for the barred owls. We also know that there's not going to be a significant likelihood of accidentally killing a spotted owl. And we know this because there were no incidental takes of spotted owls or hybrids. So I think to some lay people, barred owls and spotted owls may look alike. But if you are trained, if you have the appropriate training, they are distinctly different. And we know that this is true because in the removal experiments, 99.12% of carcasses were recovered. So we were able to make a physical identification to confirm that those were barred owls. The other carcasses that weren't removed that were not recovered were because of some reason, like it went down a steep slope that was impossible to reach, or some other reason. But it was, I think, in total 18 carcasses that were not ultimately recovered out of over 2,000 taken. I also want to make the point that lethal removal, unlike what Stephen and Jessica have said, is a normal tool in wildlife management. And it's one that EPIC sometimes opposes. But we've removed other species before, including migratory birds, to benefit other endangered species. Brown-headed cowbirds in the Midwest, something that I'm not sure how close you are to brown-headed cowbird removals in Iowa, have occurred for the great benefit of Kirkland's warblers. Also, to Jessica's idea, perhaps, that there wasn't a sufficient consideration of other alternatives, we know that non-lethal removal is infeasible. We know this because British Columbia attempted to do non-lethal removal and found that it was infeasible. So we're building upon, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is building upon previous experiments and coming up with a data-driven plan to do barred owl removal in areas that it's going to be most effective to the northern spotted owl. Lastly, we know that this is feasible. This is an area of contention with animal rights activists. So removal experiments have shown that it's possible to remove barred owls at scale to support the goals of the barred owl removal strategy. We also know that the cost estimates produced by animal rights groups are just absurd. Animal Wellness Action, who Jessica represents, has claimed over $1 billion cost for this entire program. We know from removal experiments that cost is going to be significantly less, $4.5 million to $12 million a year, with costs expected to decrease over time as the barred owl removal program works, because there are going to be fewer barred owls to remove. We're going to improve efficiencies at scale. So ultimately, my organization is in favor of this. That's why we're defending the northern spotted owl in court. And unfortunately, I appreciate the animal rights groups. I think that their moral inclination here is right. I want us to want to defend wildlife. That's why I went to law school. I was president of my school's Student Legal Animal Defense Fund. I am a vegan. I've been a vegan for 19 years. So I appreciate these points raised by animal rights groups, but I think that they're misguided and fundamentally the science works against their positions. And with that, somewhat aggressive end, I will turn to Avram.
You're muted, Avram.
Sorry. Thanks, Steve. I'm going to get my presentation up. Okay. A couple quick things. Sorry, I'm having trouble here. I'm Avram Hiller. I'm a professor at Portland State. I also direct an animal ethics society. I do have this slide deck available online in case you want to just look at it in your own time. You could write that down or just Google search me and it's on my homepage. Last year, a couple of colleagues of mine and I published this piece in the New York Times referring to the Fish and Wildlife Management Plan as dystopian. One note is that to call it dystopian isn't to say that it's wrong. We do say it's wrong, but let me focus right now on the dystopian aspects of it. So one thing is that at least as the plan goes, an enormous number of barred owls would have to be killed. Now, if it does go up to the 450,000, maybe Tom might dispute that, but if it does go up to that, then on average it would be 40 a day every day, or more than one per hour for 30 years. And not just that, but it'll have to keep going indefinitely. Barred owls are here to stay, and so they're going to have to keep doing this. And given the reality of climate change, invasive species will keep appearing and out competing native species. So we have this general policy of culling that'll lead to many guns in many landscapes, including federally designated wilderness areas. And so by using the term dystopian, what we're really hoping to do is get the public and policymakers interested in seeking alternative long-term conservation strategies that would generalize. Some philosophical background. I approach this not as a legal scholar, but as an ethicist. It's a really complicated ethical issue. It involves weighing distinct kinds of goods, which is always very difficult. It weighs the goods of individual animal welfare against the goods of species preservation, biodiversity, and all of these things are topics that there's no pure consensus among philosophers about how to do this and how to weight these goods. I'm going to actually skip this in the interest of time. Now, there's an important semantic distinction here. You don't need to have a PhD in philosophy in order to get this distinction. There's distinction between generic terms like the barred owl, like the barred owl hunts at night, and that refers to barred owls as a whole species. And on the other hand, there's plural terms, and they look the same because you can add an S, but barred owls can refer to a group of individuals. So some terms like barred owls can be used either as a generic or as a plural. And so this issue pits the northern spotted owl subspecies understood generically against barred owls understood as referring to that many hundreds of thousands of individual birds. So is culling harmful to the barred owl? Not much, and is culling harmful to barred owls? For sure. And the Fish and Wildlife Service, EIS, just basically says that it's not harmful to barred owls because only a very small fraction of the overall barred owl population will be taken. But it's misleading because it sure will be harmful to barred owls. I'm not going to actually go over this. You've already seen a couple people do this. These are cute pictures of owls, barred owls. Also, Aldo was very cute. They mutually preen. They're good parents. One thing in Tom's picture, there is prey in the talons. You could also have much more aggressive pictures of barred owls, which I haven't done, but in fairness, barred owls are mean predators. So we should talk about, in general, if we want to decide about the ethics of killing barred owls, we should just come up with general considerations about why it's wrong to kill anybody or anything. So what's wrong with killing in general? And in philosophy, there are two main traditions ethical traditions that I'll at least focus on here. And the first is a deontological tradition or a Kantian tradition. Kant himself wouldn't like what I'm about to say, but other people in that tradition hold something like this. So first, just define the notion of a subject of a life, which is a being with consciousness, sentience, self-awareness, and life projects. And so this, Tom Regan, when he first was writing this in the 80s, intended this to apply for sure to people, but also to a wide swath of advanced non-human animals. And so here's an argument why it might be wrong to take barred owls. So first, it's always wrong to treat an individual who's a subject of a life as a means to another's end. And barred owls are indeed subjects of lives. They fit these criteria. And killing barred owls in order to save the northern spotted owl under the plan treats these individuals as mere means. We are going to treat you, barred owl, as an individual who is disrupting this other thing. And in so doing, you're not treating the barred owl as its own individual with its own plans and goals and experiences. So on this deontological version, it's simply morally wrong to kill barred owls under this plan. There's no ifs, ands, and buts, that it is simply morally wrong. And maybe just to push this a little further, like let's say there's a community of people, an endangered culture, and the only way to preserve the endangered culture of people is to shoot a lot of other people. Now, obviously, we would say that that's wrong. And one thing in at least animal ethics, we try to say that we shouldn't be speciesist, that we shouldn't make distinctions between different species. And so if it's wrong to kill one very large amount of people in order to save another culture, then that should apply to owls. And seemingly we should look for other ways to do it. Now, the thing I'll say is that this premise here, premise one there, is not something that I myself accept. So that's the deontological argument, but it's not one that I myself hold. Instead, I myself am a consequentialist. I think a lot of animal ethicists are consequentialists, although there's a mix. And to be a consequentialist, and utilitarianism is one form of consequentialism, what you have to do is weigh the moral considerations on both sides. And in this case, there are very interesting, complex moral considerations on both sides. So here's the consequentialist version of the argument. First of all, we should just promote the most overall long good in the long run, the most overall good. Like, why would you ever do something that led the world to be worse than another action that you could have done would make it? So premise two is to say that the service plan doesn't promote the most overall good. And then because of this, the plan is simply wrong. The issue here, though, is that premise two here needs more elaboration, needs more defense. It's really difficult to determine what promotes the most overall good, and that's because, first of all, we don't have a consensus on the theory of what is good, and second, it's a bit unclear in this case how to promote it. So just to make the issue really complex, at least from the consequentialist perspective, how bad is it to kill that many animals? Well, killing an animal causes pain to the animal. It ends an individual's life plans. But for the consequentialist, as I said, you need to think about net effects. And so one, not to be crude here, but when you kill an animal, you're not actually making the difference between it living an eternal life versus dying. What you're doing is pushing forward its date of death. And one other thing is that deaths in the wild can be painful. So contrary to what the deontologists would say, for a consequentialist, it's actually not fully clear the wrong of killing an individual animal. Now, another thing, barred owls themselves kill other animals. Typically, they kill more than spotted owls, and we have to wonder sort of those consequences. And then what will the other consequences be if it does occur or not? So I'll leave it at that. There's more to say, but so the other thing we have to look at is, well, what's the benefit that we'll get from killing barred owls? And I think there's actually ethically speaking, less of a benefit of doing this than a lot of other people might say. So let's make a distinction between intrinsic value and instrumental value. Intrinsic value is value something has in itself, and instrumental value is value that insofar as it promotes something else. And so one big question is whether environmental wholes, like species or subspecies, have intrinsic value. And the truth is that most philosophers nowadays, at least in the tradition I come from, say no. And so that the idea that if the northern spotted owl goes extinct, that itself is intrinsically bad is something that's really very controversial, at least among philosophers. Some in my tradition do say that it is wrong, and some in other traditions also say that it would be bad. But that's a very controversial claim that I won't say anything more about now. Another topic is this notion of invasiveness that Tom focused on, and one thing Steve suggested, it's actually hard to give an account of what invasiveness is, and philosophers do talk about that. And second, does invasiveness make an intrinsic moral difference? Like, it's not this barred owl's fault that its ancestors moved from one place to another, so why should that make a difference in the morality of killing it? And similarly, we can say something for naturalness. Does naturalness make a moral difference? And again, most philosophers say no. So the upshot here is that, and we could talk about this for weeks and months, is that it's a bit unclear what the benefits would be for killing barred owls, at least the intrinsic benefits. Now, the next thing to look at would be the instrumental benefits of killing barred owls. So one thing that that I think wasn't really emphasized, that I think is a big part of where Tom is coming from, is that if the northern spotted owl goes extinct, then these forests are just going to be open up for logging. That given the regulatory structure with the ESA is the key to protecting these forests right now. And if we lose the ESA protection over the forest, then it really opens it up to logging. Steve did say something really interesting, which is that if we do kill the barred owls, then this will have a precedent where companies won't want to have habitat preservation, and they'll just want to kill the invasives. So that might be some reason why, instrumental reason why it's bad to kill the barred owls. Again, here it's kind of a complicated case. And so in terms of these relevant political issues, we wonder like what the status of these forests would be if it loses ESA protection. And you have to wonder what other conservation mechanisms there might be. And so what I've given you, I think, so far is kind of a mixed picture about the ethics of the case. But I myself still do support the legal claims that Jessica and Steve's organizations are making against the service. And my main thing here is a procedural point. And this, Jessica did talk about this, that impacts on the welfare of individual animals should be considered in EISs. Now, if you look at NEPA, it does seem to require that individual welfare be considered, but it wasn't in this case. One thing is that NEPA is a bit ambiguous. If you look at it, it says that you need to make an environmental impact statement, but it doesn't, in the way it defines environment, it actually isn't clear whether animal welfare as individuals needs to be required. So one thing is that I'd really like clarification of that, and I would like somebody to come down and saying that it needs to require it. And it's actually been inconsistent in previous EISs. So there's this disastrous case of the East Sand Island cormorant where they moved it. And I think Tom had said that his group didn't support that plan. But in that plan, they again didn't consider individual welfare. There's another case that isn't working out well either, where they're moving mountain goats from the Olympic National Park to the North Cascades, and that's not going well. In that case, they did consider individual animal welfare. So legally, it's been mixed exactly how it's happened. And one thing is that the MBTA is explicit in saying that individual welfare has to be considered, and seemingly it wasn't done, as Jessica was pointing out. And I want to raise some ethical issues about whether these environmental wholes really are valuable. I want this to be more openly discussed. And I also want to help encourage a larger conversation about long-term strategies for both animal welfare and conservation. And I thought about like,
Oh, wait, can you hear me? I think that we have a class coming into this room in
Oh,
5 minutes, so I think we've unfortunately kind of run out of time. I really
Okay.
last thing I want to do is cut off the presentation, but
yeah, okay.
we have maybe time for one quick question
Okay,
because we have a class coming in. I'm so sorry.
for sure, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
If we don't kill the barred owls, what is the alternative in order to protect the spotted owls?
There is no alternative. The spotted owl goes extinct if we don't kill barred owls.
I think the unfortunate truth is, there's a high likelihood the spotted owl is going to go extinct no matter what. And another truth here is that if barred owl management and killing of barred owls is the way to save the spotted owl, it's going to have to continue into perpetuity. There's no limit. This plan doesn't purport to exterminate barred owls from the Pacific Northwest or to prevent more barred owls from arriving in the future. So if this is truly the solution to helping spotted owls, this has to continue indefinitely.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Let's thank our panelists. Thank you so much, panel. I will have a quick wrap up.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, no.